Welcome to the next episode of the Security Champions podcast. My name is Michael Birch. I am your host and the Director of Application Security here at Security Journey. I am joined today by the SolarWinds CISO, Tim Brown. He's a Chief Architect, Distinguished Engineer, and a Board Advisor. He's worked on all sorts of different security-related issues, anything from vulnerability management, identity management, to intrusion detection, to being an advisor for a CISO and for advisory teams and global strategy. He also has 15 issued patents and has done a lot of work within the patent world. And I think really the best is to jump in and have Tim Brown really tell you his story of how he's gone from building up from being an engineer and really become such a big proponent in the security world.
Yep, thanks, Michael. It's great to be here. So, so I've been around for a while, right? From the dawning of the internet to today. So building products is kind of where I started. So as an engineer, built products, wrote a lot of code, worked on a lot of different things. And then switched over to a CTO office and really helped drive quality in code, helped drive where we were going from a direction perspective. Happened to be at Symantec. So in those cases, all security, everything security, everything that we were doing was focused on security. There I focused primarily internally and helped all of our architects, our engineers, how do we do the right thing? How do we build innovative stuff? How do we move forward with the company? Then switched over to more external. So joined CA as CTO for their security unit. It really focused a lot on government, focused a lot on overall directions of where we go, as you mentioned, in identity and other areas, and testified a few times on how we should embrace cloud computing in government entities and those types of things. Then did a startup for a little while, then went to Dell Software, new little venture there, went from 0 to $4 billion in 4 years. Helped on that side, again, focused on security, and really security from engineering product side. Then I decided I would hop over to do more security operations and also still help product teams. That's what I joined SolarWinds about 6 years ago. And great experience, not one that I want everybody to live through, a couple of years ago with our incident. But overall, each one of these has helped me learn, helped me grow, helped me understand more, and really help others as much as I can.
I think that's an important thing to call out too. It's usually during some of our more difficult experiences really where we grow the most, right? And we kind of explore that security mindset and be like, okay, now we've seen how things can sometimes go wrong. How do we grow and adapt for that next phase and kind of move on? What were some of the things that, as you kind of grew that journey from going from engineer into security, that drew you into security? What was that kind of that made you really want to make that switch over?
Yeah, so security in general, I was always building security product, right? And the great thing about security is it's always changing, always different, always challenging. A lot changes, a lot still stays the same, right? Our bad guys are our bad guys, always trying to make money. They have been really since almost day two, right? Day one, it was kind of cool to go in and, get your software to spread, that type of stuff. But day two, it was, hey, how can we make money out of it? So just the advancements. Nation state attacks been around forever, but different models, different methods. So when we look at something that constantly changes and you really need to be a good lifetime learner, security ends up being that. One of the reasons I switched over to, an operational role, 6 years ago, and I wanted to still do product security, and I had the opportunity to do that, but I also had the opportunity to, build out the security team here and really focus on securing the operations as well at the same time. I'd been telling CISOs what to do for many years, and it was time for me to go off and be, practical on that side. So that's really the journey that got me here. Different background, but it really, the skills that I learned throughout the other practices really helped me, through our difficult times. And it was, very useful to have all of the background experience doing other things.
I think that that diversity and experience is so important nowadays, especially in security, because it's really, if you come in and your whole world is just security and you haven't really operated outside of that, you lose some of that empathy for working with those other people that we work with, whether it's an engineer, a developer. Like if you haven't been in that role, it makes it more difficult to relate with those people.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just at an engineering company, that's what we do, right? We build product, right? And run services. So it is important that you have those skills, that you're not just the security operations guy. You're actually somebody that's, been in their shoes. You know how to balance. When people are, sometimes telling you that's going to take way too long or way too short, you have the ability to, kind of understand a little bit more about what they're going through and why they're going through things. And so that experience just helps you position security from both business side as well as the security side, right? We always have trade-offs. There's nothing that's ever perfect. So, prioritization, important to do, both from a business perspective as well as a security perspective as well as an engineering perspective. So you have to balance all of those to do a good job.
Yeah, and that makes a whole lot of sense. Now, you mentioned, you kind of brought up the security incident that happened recently with SolarWinds. I'm pretty sure that you've probably talked ad nauseum to so many different groups and individuals about that event. But one thing I would like to ask is there anything that you haven't really had a chance to say about that event, maybe in a different light, like things that maybe you've learned or you saw that you'd like to kind of share about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's been 2.5 years or so right now. So we're at 2 years and 4 months since the incident. And, I think I think one of the things that we can say is that our response has been recognized from the world as a very good response. And that's something that people can take a lesson from, right? Some of the things that we didn't do is we didn't try to fight bad press, right? We had a pure mission of let's get our customers in a good spot. Let's make sure our customers are taken care of. And let's be as open and honest and share as much information as we can from the start, and then continue it throughout the process. So other things is we owned it, right? It happened, right? There's no way around it. So that's another lesson people can go through, right? It happened to you. Just own it. Just say that it happened, right? And then what are you going to do, right? What are you going to do after that? How are you going to move forward from that? How are you going to make sure you get your customers in the right spot? How are you going to regain trust in the company? Be exemplary in what you're going to do after these types of things, right? Don't just be good enough. Right. So, we did things like take 6 months off from development and of features and focus purely on security. We invented a brand new build system that is where we build multiple pipelines and then compare results at the end. No one person having access to all of the pipelines. So you assume breach and say, okay, if one person is tainted, can my build get affected? The answer is no, right? At this point, because of really the assumed breach model. Did things like, multi-tiered MFA across the board. Before we were seeing that, now there's kits to avoid MFA, right? And circumvent MFA, but not to circumvent YubiKeys. So we have, pretty much rolled YubiKeys out to everybody but sales so far. Sales will come up very shortly. But that helps us from authentication authorization. It took Zero Trust and went from 20 or so apps to 200. So a lot of improvements across the board. So try to be exemplary in what you're doing if you ever go through the incident. Be open. Share as much as you can. Talk to people. What we found is that it's terrible that it happened, but if you can take that terrible that it happened and then share things with others, support government initiatives such as the new cybersecurity strategy has a lot of things that were basically a result of the response from Sunburst. So if you can involve others, embrace kind of helping the world move forward from the type of incident, then you're doing something good and find something good out of something that was pretty terrible. So that's kind of some of the advice out there.
I love hearing that side of it too, because I think so often people get fixated on this incident, this is what happened, this is the data that was lost, and it's kind of like almost crisis news, right? Versus like hearing okay, yeah, you know what, to be honest, this is security. In the end, if people don't have time and money, they're gonna breach your system. Like it's eventually gonna happen. So the question is, how do we mitigate it? How do we respond in a way that, like, as I think you put perfectly, that we act kind of honorably and do good for us and focus on our customers and the community versus following all the reactionary hype of just trying to maybe cover it up and try to make us not look as bad, because that's too easy of a thing to do. Be like, oh yeah, but we had all these in, so like it shouldn't be our fault. Try to like displace blame, which from everything you guys are saying, you didn't. You really embraced that and went, okay, let's be better. Let's take that next step and initiative.
Yep, absolutely. And then the initiatives to help the world, right? That's a good part that can come from these, right? And some of that has led into more scrutiny of how we develop software, more scrutiny of the supply chain, more scrutiny of what that software supply chain looks like, how we're going to deal with open source. Where supply chain, little supply chain meaning a product supply chain, big supply chain meaning a services supply chain. So think of the power grid as a supply chain thing, and then our product as a supply chain. So all of those started just coming out from the remediation that our customers needed to do. They were like, okay, well, where is SolarWinds? Well, we don't know. We don't know what our supply chain looks like. We don't know what exists in there. Oh, we're such a small cost associated with, again, say the power grid, right? We're such a small cost of something that you don't even get to be a critical component of that entity. And that's what we found for a number of government entities and others, is that they didn't realize that what software was inside their larger supply chain, because, well, I've got hundreds of millions of dollars of equipment here. That's the important thing. And then you say, well, what this software fits there? So the whole conversation of how we should evaluate software, where it fits, whether it should be on your mission and business critical list. And it had nothing to do with cost at that point. It had to do with, what does it have access to? Where does it sit in my network? What does it do? So those types of conversations happen post-incident, which are good. And then hence some of the regulations and other things that happen.
Yeah, and I think at the end state, it's like, and I've seen it, I think the companies afterwards has come out so much stronger, right?
Yep.
It's bought back that confidence, and the way it reacted, it showed the rest of the world that even after an incident, that you do stand for exactly what you want to, for the good of the company and your customers.
Yeah, and we tried to, it was terrible that it happened, no question. It was terrible for all of our customers. It was terrible for us. So we don't, we don't belittle that at all, right? It was, a really big event for a lot of people, and but with that, we tried to do the right things, and we have lucky to have great products that customers love, and because if they didn't, they wouldn't come back, right? They would have had a choice. They wouldn't have necessarily come back. Prior to the incident, all public information that our renewal rates were in the low 90s prior to the incident. They dropped down a little bit. Now they're last quarter back up at 92%, I believe was the number. So it really is went through a recovery period, but the work that we've done on the outside, the work that we've done on the inside, the work to be exemplary has really helped that recovery area. So we hope we are a little bit of a lesson to others about how you can manage through an incident that is very broad, very global, and come out of the other end doing okay.
Yeah, and I think that's the best part there, is the fact is, because of the transparency, the ability that other companies should be able to go in, look at what happened, say, okay, this is how we should approach this.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, well, before we jump into kind of the core of the conversation that I wanted to talk to you about, we're going to take a quick break. I'm going to have a couple words from our sponsors here at Security Journey, and then we're going to jump right back into our topic.
Awareness programs don't provide enough in-depth learning. Ensure your technical teams are getting the knowledge they need to build safer software. Security Journey provides hands-on secure coding training in an application sandbox that allows developers to identify, break, and fix common security vulnerabilities. Give your developers the opportunity to recognize and prevent common and emerging security issues before they become a problem. Visit securityjourney.com to try our training today.
So welcome back to the Security Champions podcast. I'm joined here with the SolarWinds CISO, Tim Brown. We're actually here today to talk about starting with this concept of elegant code. Now, I've heard you use this phrase before, and I would love to hear more about why elegant code is such an important thing when we're talking about security.
Yeah, great question, great topic. When we look at, so again, back to my background of, I've done a lot of engineering, a lot of code in the background. And by the way, I don't consider my code elegant. My code really got stuff done, right? And it worked well. But when you think about what's elegant, right? Elegant's a hard word to think about. It's not efficient. It's not like structured. It's elegant. Now, so I was thinking of a good analogy. You can read a manual, right? You can read a manual. You read a book, and it's got facts, and it's there. Fact. Then you read like a great novel, and it flows. It is so nice to read. It is, everything's in the right place. Everything just is, working in place and working where it needs to be. Code has that same type of structure, right? Somebody that truly writes elegant code is like a good book. Right? It starts at the beginning, it comes through the right model, it flows exactly the way you want it. It's separated into the right size and right types of modules. It has great architecture, and it just flows as one cohesive piece. Now, elegant code is so simple to maintain. It usually is correct. Bugs in it are not necessarily there. Those elegant code writers really take a lot of pride in what they're producing, but it is truly an art form in many ways, right? It's not just, as I said, I wrote code that wasn't necessarily elegant. It got it done. But there are people out there that when you look at them and it says, oh wow, okay, this is what we're looking for. And why is it so important? Why is it so important from a security perspective? Those who write elegant code usually get mad when a bug shows up in their code, whether it's security or just a bug. They don't say, I didn't have a bug in my code. What they'll say is my test program didn't catch it. Because that's the maturity that they have. They write something, they test it. They write their test harnesses around the outside of it, and they're doing all of their own work. And what you see is that level of a coder usually produces, a good percentage of your software and produces a very low percentage of your issues and bugs. So in many ways, we don't necessarily teach elegance in school. We don't respect elegance. We don't promote elegance as much as what we should. And, from a coding perspective, I think it is important that we do that, right? I think it's important that we highlight, highlight folks that are doing great, that are, and give them enough of the exposure so that we get more and more and more people doing those things that are over and above. Because at the end of the day, it's so much cheaper to fix either a security issue or a bug early in the process than it is when a product gets released. So I think we're going to end up with, back onto regulation and other things, we're going to start getting more oversight on how we build code. We're going to get more oversight on, a line of code through the product till it comes to a build, more oversight there. I think it's just going to be necessary, right? That, we get to have a little bit more structure and more control and more inspection of what we've been doing from a software engineering perspective. 10 years ago, I wouldn't have thought that, right? But I think that what we've seen is that it's just, in order for us to get to the point of having better supply chain, having better models in place, that we're probably going to go over that edge. And yeah, not for everybody, not for everything, but when you're doing business with certain entities, that's what we're going to start, looking at. And that's what U.S. government and others are starting to kind of trend towards. So as engineers, as development companies, we have to start thinking about it. We have to start saying, okay, how do we, promote better? How do we do more design reviews? How do we do more architecture reviews? How do we, promote better practices? And I think as schools and other things, as we're pushing out, engineers to develop code, I think it's also, time for us to start thinking there too, right? How do we just, not get graded on getting the right answer out, but get graded on the structure and the architecture of the code that we're writing?
And that comes to an interesting concept of how do we tackle this problem, right? So elegant code is an art form, right? It's something, art isn't something that like I necessarily can read once and then apply, right? Art's something I have to practice. It's a skill I have to really work on to do correctly. Because I've taken a lot of software development classes myself. I could read something that tells me how to set up my models and how to do this stuff, but until I start getting in and getting hands-on and really playing with it, it doesn't really sink in. So for something, when we talk about like an elegant code, do we tackle this in the college level, or is this something that we are tackling at the peer review level, the mentoring level? Like, what do you think is the best area to focus our efforts to start shifting this change?
Yeah, I think I think we start early, right? For one thing, right? If we start early and start kind of having higher expectations, right? Than, when I went to school, right? The expectation was you got the right answer out at the end, right? And that's what, did your program perform the function that it was supposed to? Did the answer come out? That's what we got graded on, right? The answers had to be right. And move towards more of, okay, yeah, the answer was right, but was the structure right? Did it flow well? Did it start going down the right paths to be able to get there? And so when we start thinking of it there, then absolutely peer reviews, absolutely architecture reviews. We do architecture reviews internally for essentially anything that's a major feature. And that helps, right? That helps you start moving down that path. The other thing that we can do from a software company perspective is, when we acquire new products, startups are probably one of the fastest, right? They develop code very fast. And a lot of that code should get thrown out and restarted in many cases, simply because, you're working on a product, you need to get work, it needs to be functional, it needs to be moved fast and super fast going through there. So, structure of some of the startup code often is less elegant, right? It is just get it done and get moving forward. So as acquirers of software, we need to be able to take that responsibility to be able to invest in rework and be able to, help us move forward from that perspective as well. But I really do think that we're going to start being held to a little bit of a higher standard. We as software engineers are going to be held to a little bit higher level of a standard, as time goes by, right? We see signs of that again, SBOMs. We see signs of that with some of the supply chain things. We see signs of that with, liability associated with software, right? We see signs of other things that say, as a community, we're going to need to expect more of ourselves and of our peers and of others.
And I love that you bring up that startup side of it too, right? So I just recently have had the experience of I joined Security Journey, where I currently work, as employee number 4, right? Yep. And then we grew it up to a much larger organization, been post-acquisition. There's been a refactor in there too, and one of the biggest things behind our refactor was we had like 2 to 3 people writing all the entire software base for entire application. They kind of cycled through too. So definitely elegance was not probably part of the vocabulary what we'd used to describe it at that time. But we identified that because that led to so many issues. It made it so much more clunky, and it made, obviously there's going to be built-in vulnerabilities because it just wasn't cohesive and clean. we dedicated almost entire 6 months on just refactoring. We put all the other features aside. We said, look, we need to make sure this is done right. And that's what, and it had such a huge impact for the long term for us. Our stuff, everything was just cleaner. It was faster going forward. It made everything so much more crisp. But you're right, that startup mentality, there has to be that time that you can't just keep patching a problem, right? You have to at some point say, okay, we're growing up in maturity. We need to step back and make sure our software grows with us.
Exactly. So, I think, we help the problem get better by a number of different things. Help the problem get better from education, help the problem get better from, peer reviews and others, and more kind of structure around those things. And setting expectations. Just because you get the right answer doesn't mean that the code that you produced was supportable and long life and long living and all of those things, or secure necessarily. Because in general, well-written software is secure software, right? When you start taking shortcuts, that's when you get to buffer overflows. That's when you get to injection. That's when you get to other things, because you just have not coded appropriately, or you coded quick and it got it to work, but it doesn't work on all the exception cases.
And I think especially when you look at a code base, I can tell when I look at somebody who's done something like you talked about, elegant code, right? Because there's definitely been senior engineers. I sit there and look at their stuff, and part of the hesitancy I feel that probably a lot of people see is they see that they're like, oh my gosh, that's gorgeous. You must have spent forever on that, right? The idea is that must have taken you like 10 times longer to make it that clean. And I think that might be somewhat of a fallacy.
Yeah, I agree. So once you get those habits, right, once you understand what you need to do, it is just the way that you do things efficiently. And then the back end side of it is so much less, right, from a quality perspective and a bug perspective and a go back and fix things perspective. So making sure we don't shortcut, making sure that, we give people appropriate time. I'm not saying that you go back and you have to spec out everything and have every line specced out and all of those things. That's not necessary. But you can get the right habits in place that, agile doesn't mean just being sloppy, right? It's not an excuse to be sloppy. It's an excuse to be able to iterate, yes, but iteration doesn't mean, sloppiness, right? And it's hard for, folks that haven't necessarily been there and done that and lived with different models for a long time to kind of think outside that box and say, what should I expect as an engineering manager? What should I expect from as a coder? What should I expect from an architect? So I think that's the other place, right, that we have to realize that if our expectation is that we're writing good, solid, supportable code to the future, and elegant in the middle there, that how are we going to figure that out? Right? What are we going to look at? And a piece of code is not a piece of code is not a piece of code, right? And many people will think that just a developer is a developer is a developer, and we know that's not the case, but that's not always what others will see or believe. So it's important people think about what they're trying to get to, where they are from their journey, right? If you're a startup, absolutely, you got to work fast, but with the exceptions or with the expectation that, hey, some of this stuff's going to need to get refactored, right? That's okay.
Yeah, and then that makes sense. It's just acknowledging. So it's part of that, though. It's not ignoring. It's acknowledging, right? Because that's part of dealing with risk is you acknowledge it, you accept the risk, and then you have a plan to remediate. And rather than just ignore it and pretend it's not happening, right? That's the way that not to do risk mitigation.
Yeah, exactly. And when you have stuff that's going to be long-lived, it's going to be long-lived. But the more people we get thinking, about more of a structured model for how we develop what we develop, and more a helpful model, then then we get better and better software in the market, and we reduce vulnerabilities, we reduce bugs, we reduce issues. But I think just as a broader kind of view of software engineering, we haven't really done that great in the last 30 years, right? And we have Microsoft Patch Tuesday, right? Not to pick on Microsoft, it happens, but that it's just we have that and we have accepted it, right? As a community, we have had a level of acceptance of bugs and acceptance of vulnerabilities and acceptance of things. So can't put the the genie back in the bottle, but we can look to say, well, how do we get better than we were last year, right? How do we get better than we were last year? And I do go back to the regulations that are probably pending, but their expectation is that we do get better than last year, and that we do get better than last year, and that we do get better than last year. So that's going to take work, right? And it's not easy, and it's not going to be structurally fun for folks in some cases, but I think it is our responsibility as software folks and software companies to say, well, this really isn't that acceptable. Let's get better, right? Let's, why do we have Patch Tuesdays, right? Let's, and how do we get beyond that as a industry?
And kind of a concept, Thelma, that piggyback on something you said earlier about to express where we should focus our efforts, right? And part of this goes to not all developers write the same amount of code. Not everybody's producing the same amount to a project. I know that's never been the case where I'm working, that there's individuals that do a much larger part of the work for those organizations. And to be honest, the way I think about it, usually those are the people that are writing elegant code, right? The ones that are producing quite a bit more because they have a lot more pride. I don't know. It's just they're very proud of their work and they're very productive, right? I don't know what your experience of seeing that is or kind of opinion.
Yeah, so I've had a number of different teams where some of the best coders were the most productive, right? And not always the case, and it's not always easy to see, right? Unless you're kind of looking for it, right? But it is a worthwhile study to do, right? So if you're looking at your environment and you want to see something, take a look at look at your bug load, look at the code that somebody touches, look at the bugs that you have for them, and is there patterns that you see? And if you see patterns of this person's injecting the code that they have has a lot of bugs associated with it, then you figure out how you can help them, right? You figure out how you can help them kind of grow in their models to work better, right? Because we always track bugs, so we know where the bugs are. We don't necessarily track who touched the code last always, but you can get there. But it is absolutely a trackable a way, something that can be improved over time, something that you can watch, something that you can encourage. Not that everybody understands every instance of every system and the back ends of every system, and it goes deep, etc. So there's bound to be bugs and issues. But when you look at individuals, you can see that this set of individuals are really top notch in their field and their elegance, and then you see others that need help to get there.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. And kind of like, so especially when we talk about the fact is there's always going to be some bugs, right? Their bugs are inherent. It's going to happen. No one's perfect. As long as humans are touching code, right, something's going to have mistakes. It's going to be built in. Now, as security people, as we approach this problem and we start looking at, okay, we know there's certain bugs in systems, prioritization of how we tackle that, right? And it really is the goal that we should, hey, I want 100% fix everything all the time, and if it comes up, it needs to be fixed? Or is there a way we can shift our mindset to do that evaluation and acceptance and maybe mitigate in different ways?
Yeah, it depends on where you are from a life cycle, right? So often you've got history, right? Very rarely does anybody start and build brand new code, right? A lot of the security issues that we face today are often in libraries that we don't control, right? That's one thing. But some of the code that we write can have vulnerabilities in it. So, but it is important to structure and prioritize because nobody can do everything that they want to do, right? We just stop the presses for everything. So, how do you prioritize, right? You prioritize those things that have limited compensating controls, right? You prioritize those things that can truly, do harm, right, to the customer or to the product or to the user, those types of things. So those are really easy, right? So remote code execution that doesn't require authentication. Everybody knows, okay, that gets a 10, that gets immediately worked on. When you start going down the path a little bit, you get into gray areas. Okay, where should this fit in a priority, right? And at that point, you go to the compensating controls. You go to, well, what else could happen here? What is necessary? Do I have to log into something to get there, right? Do I have to, is it accessible to everybody? Is it accessible to the internet? So a number of different factors go into what may not be direct compensating controls, but are compensating controls from a priority perspective. Always prioritize the most important, and the ones that can do that most harm, that present the most risk. And then you work down from that slope. But the idea of a compensating control, very important to understand. So I would much rather have a CVSS of 7 that had no compensating controls fixed than a CVSS of 8 that had compensating controls, right? I would fix that 7 first because, no compensating controls, no way to stop it, no way to, help the customer. Then, that takes precedent over the one that says, you need authentication, you need authorization, so all of those compensating controls may be in place. So, but it's very important to be practical and to understand that it's not as simple as, this vulnerability needs to be automatically fixed as a priority. One of the things I did, question CISO on is their exploitability database, right? And people inappropriately said, well, this is our priority list. So this is the only thing that we'll work on is things that are exploited. And it's like, well, it may be exploited in other environments, but if you've got a Windows 95 box running at the bottom of the ocean, not connected to anything, guess what? It's doing fine, right? So should those Windows 95 bugs be your top priority? No. Your compensating control is the ocean and no wire, right? Which makes it very safe. So intelligence when you're prioritizing is very important. It's not simple number says it's most important. So think.
I feel that kind of goes into doing a better job from a security perspective of actually making evaluations before decisions, right? Because it's too easy to print off my scanning tool had 10 things it saw and just take it and like, cool, throw it over to the fence, the dev team and say, fix it. Versus like, at some point that like as a developer, I know I'd be frustrated if I pick it up. I'm like, yeah, I kind of know that's there, but I have 5 things around this thing because I have to have this piece of thing here. So I made security controls, right? So no, I'm not going to fix it. It's already been planned for, right? So a little more in-depth research into like, hey, this is here. Is it really something we need to fix? And if so, what's the best way to do that?
Right. So thinking, understanding, talking, right? Talking is always good too. We sometimes forget that. All of those things help us appropriately prioritize based on risk, right? And that's what our end game as a security folks is to do, is minimize risk inside the organization, minimize risk for our customers, and we do that by understanding that risk exists, right? But we can mitigate those most high risk things first, and then utilize compensating controls to lessen the risk of other things. So it really is thinking, talking, understanding, asking questions, and just not doing the easy thing is, my scanner said this, fix it, right? Because that doesn't necessarily help you prioritize the most risky things first.
Yeah, and I also think that when you go through that level too, I think you lose the. I'm a huge proponent of threat modeling, right? So
Yep.
if I'm just going off my list of security things that are popping up, I'm not taking that to my threat model. I'm not actually evaluating it against the system that I've already built and taking it that next level of security, because I think that's what I would call intelligent security instead of reactive security, right?
Yep. Yep. And I think we all need to strive for that, right? Because there's a number of reasons why, right? So you're from a security folks that are part of development teams, right? The way that we work with the engineering team is not to give them busy work, right? Give them work that matters. Make sure that we're prioritizing appropriate things, so that when we need something done, it gets done, as opposed to, well, I've got all of this stuff that you need to get done, right? So those models of really true interaction, super important. And appropriate prioritization, and talking to somebody. If you don't understand it, talk to them. Understanding what the where the issue fits, and what might be in place to mitigate risk, right? So don't just take the simple easy route, right? Which is, yep, here's a list of stuff, go fix it, right? But be interactive, and that goes for the highlights anywhere, not just software development, but also with your IT functions, with your functions around every company, right? The pushing over just a list of stuff to do is probably not the right mentality to use.
Yeah, I think soft skills are lost on our technical rules. Like, I think one of the most powerful things to be an effective security person is you have to have the communication soft skill. You have to be able to sit down and have a conversation with somebody, because otherwise, I don't know how many times it happens to me every single day. I send an email, and then 5 minutes later, like, I get an email back. I'm like, oh wait, you totally did not hear the tone of my voice or understand what I was trying to convey. And so, like, it's funny because a lot of times people push, and I think it's a new current culture thing, send an email instead of a meeting because it saves time. And you know what? I'm actually, like, I push against that. And the reason being is because I'd rather I'd rather be a FaceTime. Like, especially in this remote world, I'd rather be able to look you in the eyes so you can see my body language.
Yep.
You can hear exactly what I want, because maybe what we're saving in time in it, like an email or a quick send over, we're losing in all the context of the task, right? And so we're losing communication for speed, which I think is hurting us as organizations as a whole.
I agree, right? I mean, I think we get good interactions necessarily. Some folks are really into Slack or Teams and use that well, but the click the button to just say talk to somebody is not a bad thing, right? And it does take, video does help to get rid of wrong impressions, right? Email displays emotion very poorly, right? And sometimes one direction, sometimes the other direction. So it's not bad to talk to people, and it sometimes is one of the most efficient ways to move things forward. So and it's okay not to know everything, right? Some people get nervous to talk to people because they don't know everything, and it's fine. Ask, right? Yeah, I don't understand. Why don't you think this is important, right? Oh, I get it now, right? It's okay. So I think just generally as security folks, we have to talk more, right? We have to be able to not necessarily live in our tower that we're just security. We're risk people. We're looking at risk, and people realize that across the business if you do it well. But talking is sometimes the most efficient thing to do. Go see somebody or click on a video.
So I think this is a perfect time for a question that I'm asking all of my guests as they come on. And one of the biggest ones I want to tackle, because this is I'm declared 2023 the year of security champions, right? It's the time to break down barriers between security and development and realize we're all working on the same team for the same efforts. How would you tackle the divide between security and development? What are some recommendations that you would make to help kind of create that more unified picture of one goal versus the siloed world I feel we end up living in a lot right now?
Yeah, so start off by working with them, right? Get close to them, understand kind of where their priorities are and what's going on. Get personal, meet them. That's kind of a good part to do, right? Remember that they're people. They're not a number, right? They're trying to work through their priorities, and they have priorities in different places as well. Put structure behind what you need to have done. So no question about the structure behind what you need to have done. But that structure allows you to have the conversation. Don't expect the structure to get things right? My structure is it gets a JIRA ticket, gets a security tag, it gets a CVSS score, then it gets a conversation, right? And that conversation can say, yeah, okay, here's where it fits on priorities, right? Here's where it fits for us to do things. Here's what risk it presents. So make it a two-way street as much as possible. The more you're seen as adversarial, the worse that the environment gets. As a security person, right, we have a number of kind of a few different opportunities we have to truly say do this, right? And we don't use them. We use them sparingly, right? Don't use them all the time, right? I keep those. Every once in a while I say, sorry, I need this done now. I really need this done, right? And great, but I don't do that every time, right? I don't cry wolf and for certain things. So understand what you're asking, understand what you're doing with things, understand that we're both in the same, we have both the same goals, right? Our goals is to get to acceptable levels of risk for our products, and people will understand that, right? It's when you get a little too far over the top that relationship can get soured, right? And if it already is soured, then find your security champions inside of the organization, work with them, work with others. But bottom line, remember, right? We're probably the same company or the same instance, but our goals are the same, right? Let's make sure our customers aren't at risk, make sure we're not at risk or an acceptable level of risk, and work closely together to get it done. Don't forget things. That's the other part of it, right? That's why I use JIRA for everything. I have a huge backlog of stuff. I always have backlogs, right? And they can be, dreams. What am I going to do with ChatGPT, right? That's part of my backlog. But others are, just the things that we need to get done. So by being in a backlog, they don't get forgotten, and then they can get discussed and determined where they fit. So, build up that champion. Try not to be adversarial. Go in with logic. Go in with understanding that there's both sets are very busy trying to do what they need to do, and appropriate expectation. So be practical on the decisions, and that will make you part of the team to get stuff done. So that's what I would say.
Oh, that was an awesome answer. A lot of great advice. Is there anything else that you'd like to kind of share with our audience or talk about before we kind of wrap it up?
No, just thanks for being here. Yeah, it's been a long couple of years from our incident, but we really have showed that what we've been doing fits the market. People have stayed with us, or they've come back because the products are what people need to be able to do to monitor their infrastructure. So it's very unfortunate what happened, but what we've been trying to do is be that exemplary partner for everyone, and really help the world get into a better place. So thanks for the opportunity to be on this show.
Hey, absolutely, and thank you for taking the time out and talking to us. You gave a lot of great information. I know that it's going to be great for our audience, a lot of good takeaways. And thank everybody for logging in and joining us and listening to this session. I hope that you will join us for our next episode when we continue to dive down and meet more security individuals and talk about everything that's related with security champions, security incidents, and security practices. Thank you and have a good day. And don't forget, security is a journey, not a destination.